I was standing in my own kitchen the afternoon my son-in-law told me I was living too well for someone my age. He said it casually, the way you might mention the weather. He was leaning against the counter in the house I had helped him buy, one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee I had just brewed, the other scrolling through his phone. My daughter was somewhere upstairs. The grandchildren were at school. It was just the two of us in that warm kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and dish soap, and he looked up from his screen and said, "You know, Maureen, a lot of women your age downsize, sell the house, free up some equity. It would actually help everyone." I was holding a dish towel. I kept holding it. My hands needed something to do. He had not asked how I was. He had not asked about my hip, which had been aching since September. He had just walked into my house, poured himself coffee from my pot, and told me I was living too well. I said nothing. I folded the dish towel and set it on the counter and told him the grandchildren would need picking up at 3. He nodded and went back to his phone. I drove home to Guelph that afternoon in the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like something building. The highway was gray and flat the way Ontario gets in November, and I gripped the steering wheel and let the words sit in my chest where they had landed. Free up some equity. Help everyone. I'd been a nurse for 31 years, most of that time at Guelph General. I retired at 63 with a pension that covered my needs. I owned my house outright. It was a small 2-story on a quiet street, old and a little drafty, with a garden I had kept since my husband passed 11 years ago. It was not much, but it was mine. When I got home, I put the kettle on and stood at my kitchen window looking out at the backyard where the last of the brown leaves were clinging to the maple. I thought about the mug he had used. I thought about how he had not washed it. I thought about all the ways I had quietly made their life easier and how I had never once thought to count them. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the furnace click and hum, and somewhere around 2 in the morning I got up and went to the desk in my spare room, where I keep files the way nurses keep files, organized, dated, categorized. I pulled out the folder I had labeled simply Family Support in handwriting that already knew what it would find. I'd started keeping it 3 years ago without ever admitting to myself why. Receipts, bank transfer confirmations, e-transfer notifications, monthly transfers to cover their mortgage gap after my son-in-law left his stable government job to start a consulting business that had not yet found its footing. The lease co-signing for their SUV because his credit score wasn't where it needed to be. The private school application fee for my oldest grandchild because my daughter said the public school near them wasn't right for him. The orthodontist deposit, the summer camp registration, the home insurance top-up when their premium jumped, the grocery delivery charges I had quietly absorbed when my daughter mentioned they were stretched. I sat at the desk and added it all up on a piece of paper the way I used to tally patient charts, carefully without flinching. The number at the bottom of the page made my stomach drop. Not because it was unexpected, but because seeing it written down made it real in a way that monthly transfers never had. I had been sending them just under $3,000 a month for nearly 3 years, in a country where my pension gave me a comfortable but not extravagant life. I had been quietly shrinking my savings to fill the gap between the life they wanted and the life they could actually afford. I looked around the spare room. The window had a crack in the seal I'd been putting off fixing. The carpet was 10 years past due for replacement. I had been wearing the same winter boots for 4 winters because I kept telling myself they were fine. They had taken a trip to Portugal in the spring. I closed the folder. I did not slam it. I pressed it shut with the palm of my hand the way you close a door you have been meaning to close for years, and I sat in the quiet of my spare room in Guelph, Ontario, and I made a decision. Morning came slowly. I made oatmeal and strong tea and sat at my kitchen table until 8 o'clock, when I knew my bank branch would be open. I dressed deliberately, my navy wool coat, the good one I saved for appointments that mattered. I drove to my branch on Stone Road and asked to speak with someone in accounts. The advisor who met me was a younger woman named Priya, patient and precise. With reading glasses, she kept pushing up her nose. I set my folder on her desk and told her I needed to cancel all recurring transfers to the account held jointly by my daughter and her husband. All of them. She looked at the list. Then she looked at me. All of these? Everyone, I said. She began the process, typing steadily. Then she paused and turned her screen slightly toward me. Mrs. Callahan, I want to flag something. There was a request submitted 2 weeks ago from a third party to add signing authority to your TFSA and your non-registered investment account. She said it carefully, the way medical people say difficult things. The request was flagged because the authorization signature didn't match your file signature. It was put on hold pending your verification. The room went very still. Who submitted it? I asked. She hesitated only a moment. The name on the request was your son-in-law. I sat with that for a moment. Outside the branch window, a city bus rolled past. A woman pushed a stroller through the November wind. Everything was perfectly ordinary, and I was sitting in a bank chair learning that the man drinking coffee in my kitchen the day before had already been quietly trying to access my retirement savings. Did it go through? I asked. No, it was flagged and frozen. But Mrs. Callahan, this would have given him authority to make withdrawals and direct transfers from both accounts. My hands were in my lap. I looked down at them. Then I looked up at Priya. I want fraud alerts on every account. I want his name removed from anything it appears on. I want new security questions, new passwords, and I want a note on file that no third-party authorization requests are to be processed without me presenting in person with 2 pieces of ID. Priya nodded. We'll take care of it. And I want a copy of the original request, I said, with his name on it. She printed it without being asked again. I walked out of the bank into the cold air with a folder that was now thicker than when I went in, and I sat in my car for a few minutes before I started it. The sky was that particular white of a Canadian November that sits low over everything like a lid. I breathed in and out slowly. I was not shaking. That surprised me. The first message came while I was still in the parking lot. It was from my daughter. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you're well. A normal message, the kind she sent every few days when she wanted to seem attentive. I did not respond. By the time I was home and had taken off my coat, the messages had shifted. From my son-in-law, Maureen, just got a notification that a transfer didn't go through. Might be a banking error on your end. Can you look into it? Then a few minutes later, also looks like the car payment wasn't covered. Can you call me? I put the kettle on again. I stood by the stove and watched the steam begin to rise. My daughter called at noon. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was careful and measured. The tone she used when she was managing me. Mom, something seems to be wrong with the transfers. We've got a few things that have bounced, and we're a bit worried. Can you call us back when you get a chance? Thanks. Thanks. As if she were leaving a message for a customer service line. I called her back at 2 o'clock. I chose 2 o'clock deliberately after I had eaten lunch and taken a short walk and let myself feel solid in my own body. Mom, she said when she picked up relief loose in her voice, I was worried. Did something happen with your account? Nothing happened with my account, I said. I canceled the transfers. A silence. What do you mean you canceled them? I mean, I went to the bank this morning and I canceled every recurring transfer I had set up for you and your husband. All of them? Another silence. Longer. Why would you do that? I let the question sit in the air for a moment. Because your husband told me I was living too comfortably for my age and should free up my equity. I took his advice. I'm living within my means now, and so will you. Mom, he didn't mean it like that. You're taking that out of context. It was just conversation. He meant it well enough to submit a request to the bank to access my TFSA and my investment account without telling me. The silence that followed was a different kind, compressed, airless. What? 2 weeks ago. His name is on the request. The bank flagged it because the signature didn't match mine and they put it on hold. I picked up the documentation this morning. I didn't know about that. Her voice had changed, gone thin and confused. I know you didn't, I said. And I meant it because in all the ways my son-in-law had built himself into the architecture of their finances, my daughter had let it happen around her more than through her. That didn't absolve her, but it was a different thing. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm not interested in sorry right now, I said. Not unkindly, but clearly. I'm interested in what you're going to do. I hung up and went back to my garden. There was nothing to do in the garden in November. I stood there anyway with my coat on, breathing in the cold air, looking at the empty beds and the bare maple and the fence that needed painting in spring. The yard was small and plain and entirely mine. The messages from my son-in-law escalated through the afternoon and evening, first confused, then explanatory, then aggrieved. He said the bank request had been a misunderstanding. He said he had been trying to set up a contingency plan in case of emergency. He said he had meant to discuss it with me but hadn't found the right moment. He said the transfers had been a family arrangement, not a one-way gift, and that canceling them without notice was disruptive and unfair. The last message came at 9 in the evening, Maureen. I think we need to sit down with a mediator. You're making decisions that affect this family without consulting anyone. We need to talk about this properly. I read it twice. Then I powered off my phone and went to bed. He came to my house the next morning without calling first. I heard the knock from upstairs and I knew before I opened the door. When I came downstairs and saw him through the glass panel, I took a moment. I smoothed my cardigan. I filled my lungs. Then I opened the door. Maureen. He looked like a man who had not slept. His jaw was set and his eyes were working hard to appear calm. We need to talk. You could have called. You turned off your phone? I stepped back and let him in because arguing at the door felt beneath me. He walked into my hallway and stopped. He had been here dozens of times and he still stood in my house the way people stand in spaces that belong to someone else. Slightly too upright, slightly too careful. I led him to the kitchen. I did not offer coffee. The transfers, he started. Sit down, I said. I pulled my folder from the counter. I had moved it there that morning, half expecting this. I placed it open on the table in front of him. Take a moment and look through that. He sat, he looked. His eyes moved across the pages, and I watched his expression shift from defensive to something more complicated. I didn't know the total was that much, he said finally. You never asked, I said. That was the problem. Neither of you ever asked. Money appeared and problems were solved, and no one ever asked what it cost me, or whether I could afford it, or what I was going without, so that you could go to Portugal. He looked up. That's not fair. The orthodontist deposit, the private school fee, 34 months of mortgage top-ups, because you left a stable job to start a business that hasn't paid you a salary yet. Add it up. Tell me what's not fair. He was quiet. And then, I said, keeping my voice even, explain to me why your name is on a bank request to access my retirement savings that I never agreed to and was never told about. I was planning to talk to you about it. I was going to ask. You were going to ask my bank first and ask me second. He had no answer for that. His hands were flat on the table and he was staring at the papers, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked like someone who had run into a wall he didn't see coming. I built something with your mother, he said quietly. I'm trying to build something for our family. I know that, I said, but you have been building it on a foundation you don't own, and I am taking the foundation back. He sat there for another minute. Then he pushed back from the table. You're going to blow up everything, he said. You know that, right? The mortgage payments, the school, everything we've built. Then you'll have to build it differently, I said. You're both under 50. You have incomes. You have options. What you don't have anymore is my savings account as a silent co-investor. He left without saying goodbye. I locked the front door behind him and stood in the hallway listening to his car leave. Then I walked back to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and washed the single mug he had left on the table. Old habits. What followed was a week I can only describe as the kind of quiet that comes after a hard frost. Everything looked the same on the surface, and everything underneath had changed. I heard from neighbors gently, sideways, the way news travels in a neighborhood that has known you for 20 years. My next-door neighbor, Harriet, not a gossip but an honest woman, mentioned over the fence that she'd seen a tow truck at my daughter's house on Wednesday morning. The large SUV, the one my name had co-signed. 2 days later, another neighbor mentioned the private school had apparently sent a notice home about an outstanding balance. I did not feel satisfied by any of it, but I did feel something clarify inside me, the way a window clarifies after you clean off the winter grime. I could see further. My daughter called me 4 days after our phone conversation. She called from her car. I could tell from the particular quality of the quiet around her voice, and she sounded different. Not managed or careful, just tired. "I need to talk to you without him around," she said. "Come for dinner," I said. "Thursday." She came alone. I made soup and bread, and we sat at my kitchen table the way we had when she was in university and would come home on weekends and want nothing more than food and quiet. She had aged this week. Not badly, but visibly. There was something honest in her face that had not been there before. "I didn't know about the bank request," she said first. "I know." "I didn't know the total of everything you'd been sending us." She wrapped her hands around her bowl. "He managed all of that. He set it up, and I let him. I told myself it was just bridging, just temporary until the business found its feet." "How long have you been telling yourself that?" She looked down. 3 years. I let that sit. "Mom, I think he's been keeping me away from the details on purpose, not just with you, with our own accounts too. When I asked about the bank request, he said it was administrative, that I wouldn't understand the structure. He says that a lot, that I wouldn't understand the structure. He says that a lot, that I wouldn't understand." Something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the November air outside. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She lifted her eyes. "I called a lawyer yesterday." I set my spoon down. "Not to go after you," she said quickly. "To understand my own situation, what I own, what I'm liable for, what he's put in my name." She swallowed. "He co-signed something last year, a line of credit. I only found out last week when the bank sent something to the house. He used our joint address but only his name. I don't know everything yet." The soup had gone quiet between us. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "You did not cause this," I said, "but you are going to have to be the one to fix it." She nodded. Her eyes were full, but she did not cry. She was stronger than she gave herself credit for. She always had been. After she left, I sat for a long time in my kitchen. The calendar on the wall still had November's page, a photograph of the Cabot Trail in autumn. I had been meaning to update it for weeks. I reached up and flipped it forward to December. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were clear. My daughter moved through whatever she was moving through with a steadiness that both surprised and relieved me. She didn't share everything, and I didn't ask for everything. But she called regularly, real calls, not managed ones, and she started asking questions about money and accounts and what I actually needed rather than assuming I was a resource. Her husband, my son-in-law, did not come back to my house. He sent one more message, longer and more formal this time, outlining what he felt I owed them and missed support and reputational damage. I forwarded it to my own lawyer, a woman named Sandra I had used once before for my husband's estate, and she responded on my behalf with a letter that, by the sound of it, was thorough and clear. I did not read his response. Sandra handled it. My granddaughter called me one Saturday morning, the older one, 17 and quieter than her brother. She asked if she could come for tea. I said yes immediately. She arrived on her bicycle, her cheeks red from the cold, and sat across from me at the kitchen table and didn't quite know how to start. So I poured the tea and waited. "Grandma," she said finally, "I heard Mom and Dad fighting. A lot. I heard your name." "I know this is hard," I said. "I found something on Dad's desk when I was looking for a pen." She opened her bag and took out her phone. She had photographed several pages, documents with my name on them, my home address, what appeared to be a property assessment and some kind of equity release proposal with a mortgage broker's letterhead. My name is borrower. My house is collateral. My son-in-law's signature is authorized representative. "He was going to put a loan against your house," she said, "without you knowing." My hands were still. My granddaughter was watching me with the particular anxiety of someone who has just handed over a grenade and isn't sure if it will go off. "You did the right thing showing me this," I said. "I wasn't sure if I should. He's my dad." "He's your dad," I agreed, "and he made a choice, and you made a different one." She stayed for 2 hours. We talked about school and her plans for university and a part-time job she was thinking of applying for at the library. When she left, she hugged me at the door for longer than usual, the way teenagers do when they are feeling something they don't have language for yet. After she left, I stood in my hallway and thought about what it means to be the person in a family who holds things together. I had been holding things together for so long, I had started to confuse the holding with the being wanted. They are not the same thing. Being needed is not the same as being loved, and it had taken my son-in-law telling me to live less comfortably in my own kitchen for me to finally feel the difference. I called Sandra the next morning and gave her the photographs. The house loan proposal never went anywhere. There was nothing to stop because it had never been formally submitted. Perhaps he had been waiting for the right moment, or perhaps he had been waiting until my daughter's name was on it too. I will never know. What I know is that Sandra sent another letter, and there were no more requests, no more messages, no more showing up at my door. December came to Guelph the way it always does, all at once. The first real snow arriving overnight so that you go to bed in November and wake up in something different. I shoveled my own walk the way I always had, and I stood in my front yard in my old boots and looked at the quiet street and felt something I had not felt in years. Not happy exactly, but present, fully inside my own life. I bought myself a new winter coat that month, a proper one, the kind with a real down fill that I had been pricing and putting back for 2 winters running. I bought the good one, dark green, warm enough for the coldest days we get here, with pockets big enough to be actually useful. I wore it to the grocery store the same afternoon and stood for a moment in the parking lot just feeling warm. Small things matter more than people say. My daughter and I settled into something new. Not the old pattern where she would call when she needed help and I would quietly provide it and we would both pretend the arrangement was mutual. Something more honest. She called to talk, not to solve. I listened without immediately offering to fix. We were both learning a different language. She was still sorting out what her marriage was and wasn't going to be. I did not push. I had offered what I could offer, which was my table and my door and a clear-eyed account of what I had seen. The rest was hers to do. In January, my granddaughter came for tea again, and this time she had already applied to 3 universities and had a shift schedule from the library on her phone to show me. She was proud of it in the way that only makes sense if you understand what it cost. Some things skip a generation. I saw myself in her more than I expected to, and that felt like something worth protecting. My grandson came too, the younger one. He was 12 and largely unaware of the adult landscape shifting around him, which was appropriate and fine. He ate 3 biscuits and showed me a video game on his phone and asked me to come watch him play hockey. I said yes. I went the following Saturday and stood in the cold arena with the other grandparents in my new green coat and cheered when his team scored, and he waved at me from the ice without embarrassment, the way children do when they still think you are simply and entirely on their side. I came home from the hockey game and made myself dinner and sat by the window in the early dark of a Canadian January. The street outside was still, lit orange by the sodium lamps, and I thought about the afternoon my son-in-law had stood in my kitchen and told me to live less comfortably. I thought about how I'd held a dish towel and said nothing. I thought about how long I had been holding things quietly without saying anything. There is a particular freedom in finally saying, enough, not in anger, not as a punishment, but as a simple statement of fact. This is enough. I have given enough. I am enough as I am in my own house, with my own pension, and my own maple tree in the backyard. The folder is gone. I shredded it in February, the receipts and the bank confirmations and the 3 years of evidence I'd kept without admitting why. I did not need it anymore. The decisions were made and documented elsewhere, and the part of me that had needed to count everything in order to believe it had been wrong, that part could finally rest. I made a proper Sunday dinner for the first time in a while. Not for anyone else, just for me. Roast chicken, roasted carrots and potatoes, a small glass of a Niagara Red I'd been saving for no reason. I set the table properly, the cloth napkins, the good plates, the whole thing, and I sat down in my own dining room in my own house in Guelph, and I ate a meal I had made for the simple reason that I deserved a good one. What I know now that I did not know 3 years ago is this: there is no version of generosity that works when it comes from fear. When you give because you are afraid of being shut out, afraid of being unnecessary, afraid of what will happen to the people you love if you stop, that is not generosity. That is a ransom you pay to a feeling that will never be satisfied. When you give from a full place, freely, clearly, because you want to and can afford to, that's different. I want to do that kind of giving again someday. I think I will. But for now, in the middle of the quietest winter I can remember, I am keeping my house and my savings and my good coat, and I am learning, at 67, what it feels like to come first in my own life. It feels a lot like being warm. I keep thinking about the dish towel, the way I just stood there holding it when he said what he said. How my hands needed something to grip so they wouldn't give me away. I've thought about that moment more than any other moment in this whole story, because I think that's where everything actually started. Not at the bank, not when I opened the folder, not when I changed the locks on my accounts. It started in that kitchen with a dish towel in my hands and a choice I made to say nothing. And then I went home and made a different choice. What I understand now is that the way things unraveled was not an accident. My son-in-law did not suddenly become someone who would try to access my retirement savings without asking. He became that person slowly, over 3 years of small moments where the answer was always yes, where money appeared without friction, where no one ever named what was happening. I let that happen, not because I was foolish. I was a nurse for 31 years. I know how to read a situation, but because I confused keeping the peace with keeping the family. They are not the same thing. That confusion cost me more than money. There is something I'd call integrity that I lost track of during those years. Not integrity in a grand spoken way, the quiet kind. The kind that means your actions match what you actually believe. I believe that grown adults should carry their own weight. I believe that generosity given from fear is not generosity at all. But I kept sending the transfers anyway because saying nothing felt safer than saying the truth. When your actions and your values stop matching, something in you knows it. even when you don't let yourself name it. I felt it as tiredness, as the sense that my own house was somehow not quite mine anymore. What Abby did, coming to my door on her bicycle with her phone and those photographs, took more clear-headedness than most adults I know. She was 17 and she saw the situation more honestly than anyone else in her family. She knew who she wanted to be, and she acted from that knowledge even when it was hard. That kind of moral clarity, the willingness to see what is actually in front of you and respond to it honestly, that is not something you were simply born with. It is something you practice in small moments until it becomes who you are. I hope she keeps practicing it. I told her so. And my daughter, what she did after our Thursday dinner took a different kind of courage. The kind that asks you to look clearly at your own life and admit that you have been looking away. It is genuinely hard to examine what you have allowed, what you chose not to see, what you told yourself was temporary. She did it anyway. She called a lawyer. She started asking questions. That willingness to face difficult truths, even when they implicate you, even when the answers are going to make your life harder before they make it better. That matters. It is its own kind of strength. I am 67 years old and I am learning, still, what it means to live honestly inside my own life. Not performing wellness or pretending the hard things didn't happen, but actually standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, with a clear account of what is mine and what I owe and what I am worth. That's all I wanted. That's everything I almost gave away. The green coat is hanging by my front door. I wear it every day,